Hey guys, I've been looking for some games in the Slav Exchange because the line that the ChessGoals repertoire uses is really interesting and a little bit new to me. I've been playing it for a little while now, and it's hard to find games because it's so rare. And so I finally played a decent game, and I thought I would share it with you and kind of go through some of what I learned when I analyzed this game. So here we play Bishop G5, and the main line that we go through in the repertoire is when they play Knight C6, we go Knight C3, and after here we capture and we get this imbalance, and we get E3, Bishop E6, and just we come to like sort of this position where we're going to put a lot of pressure on the D5 pawn. But my opponent early on played Bishop to F5, which is like not a move I've seen. It's not covered in the repertoire. But I had the main idea of what we're sort of aiming for in mind. So I went ahead and just planned with some ideas of attacking this pawn directly and maybe coming out this way, adding more pressure, taking advantage of the fact that he can't play e6 yet, and then also maybe trying to play against this pawn. So after bishop, he jumps back to bishop e6, which I think is really weird. Didn't expect this move at all, and I think it's quite poor, and I don't know why he played it. But this is kind of one of the advantages of this bishop g5 move. I think it throws people for a loop, and they're pretty lost because they don't want to commit to this weird pawn imbalance because they think you want it, which of course we do. I went ahead with e3, but I should have considered at least queen b3. I mean, I looked at this, but after just takes, um, we're clearly, the computer thinks we're better, but this is like a totally different kind of position, and there's something to be said for like trying to steer the game towards like familiar territory. So I wanted to stick with sort of the game plan that I know about. So I just went with e3, and I was just thinking I'm going to end up getting that other line we just looked at with like extra tempi, and that can't be bad. So he does come out with the f6. Of course, we take. He takes this way. Almost everyone takes this way. I know we cover some lines in the repertoire where black takes with a g pawn, but I've never actually had it happen in a game yet. So we got bishop to d3. And here, again, I probably needed to consider queen b3. I mean, I did look at it. It is a pretty typical idea where we're attacking this pawn and then getting a second attacker on this pawn. This sort of happens in the Slav often. But I didn't see where I was going to do after the simple queen d7. But I missed an idea because, we can't come here because you can just block and nobody cares. And we don't have this idea, which you often have. But there is a way, and I totally missed it. It's e4. And we're threatening just to take the pawn and push the bishop away. And so if he captures, we just go d5 anyway. And the point is after the bishop moves, now he doesn't have the ability to put a knight on c6, and we get this. So I did overlook this idea because I didn't see e4, but this is a nice one and something to keep in mind when you see these options. When sometimes you can go out to queen to b3. But I played bishop d3. Bishop b4, we always meet that with rook to c1 because we would like to keep the c file open so that we can attack down it. If we end up with a pawn on c3, that pawn can be backwards and it can be attacked. And we don't really want to ever push c4 because it would let black trade off their weak pawn. So we definitely don't want to get a pawn on c3. You could, of course, consider this move. It's probably just fine, but we kind of have this idea of wanting to put the queen out here. Which can make black perhaps nervous that we're going to come here, or maybe they think there's going to be some sort of attack later. But yeah, we almost always meet bishop b4 with the rook. He develops his knight, and I bring the queen out, and here. And so we've got a very similar position to what we were looking at above here, except for the bishop is placed differently, and we already have the rook. So we're up some tempi here. Plays rook c8, his castle, bishop d6. I guess he didn't know what else he was going to do with it. He didn't want to capture because he assumed I was going to take back with a knight. Why he should give up his bishop pair. Maybe he thinks he's setting a clever little trap, which would be, you'd be pretty brokenhearted to fall for something like this. But maybe that's what he was hoping for. But I just went ahead and played knight f4, which is the standard plan, where Now we're definitely threatening to capture the pawn, and there's not really a super good way for him to defend it. He chose f5 as a move, which I don't quite understand what his intention was here. Seems like he's just shutting his own bishop in. Maybe he was afraid. I thought during the game that he was maybe just afraid of my attacking ideas. Maybe he wasn't so worried about this pawn and thought I was going for kingside play, which can happen sometimes. So I took this way, which I think is nice. It's better than this, I believe, because it opens the c file, and I thought it maybe, depending on what he did, bringing another knight towards the king side might lead to something. So we took this way, and of course we got to take back with the knight here, because we take back with the pawn and we lose our knight. He chose knight to b4, and he has a, it seems like that we're going to have to give up the bishop, or he's going to win the pawn, or something like that. But I found this nice idea, which was to capture here, and then play bishop c4. And I thought that this pin was probably really annoying, and that this pawn was quite weak, and that my bishop would be a lot better than his knight, plus I happen to defend this pawn all at the same time. So that, to me, seems quite good. He chose queen to e7 to defend, and I played a3, and I actually had an idea. My idea, what I expected was he would go knight c6, and I wanted to play bishop b5, and say he defends it because I'm threatening to win a pawn, so he defends the threat, and I just wanted to play like this. I prevented e5 from ever happening. This pawn's weak, this pawn's weak, this pawn's weak. I have an extra pawn. I thought that with this setup, I would had really good chances to win. The computer seems to agree. But this was my idea, but I was a little bit surprised with knight a6 because I didn't expect that at all, and then I got kind of interested in this idea that his knight was offsides and couldn't do anything. Otherwise, I probably should have considered capturing the bishop here immediately. Something like this looks quite good. It's very similar to what I just talked about. We have weak pawns, and we're going to dominate the queen side. This is definitely probably would have been a better way to go. I decided that I thought I would just leave the knight off sides, and I would just pile up behind and maybe take at an opportune time when it was not technically good for him. He posed rook c7, which I thought was actually quite good, because he's just going to try to double back. And then this knight sort of makes sense for a minute because it's helping. So I don't have like any annoying discoveries like this. At least the bishop e6 doesn't work because the knight's sort of annoying. I didn't think this move was possible, which is why I thought I could quickly just double rooks and take control of the file. But I overlooked that this knight's protecting that. It's here, and queen e2. I had two ideas, queen e2 and then queen f4. Queen f4 might actually be a bit better, because if he tries to double, now I have this move, and when he plays here, I can cake, and he can't even take my rook, because it's just checkmate. And he also can't take the bishop, because that's also checkmate. So there was that idea, and I honestly don't know why I decided not to. I think because I started calculating the move I played, which is queen e2, and I looked at some similar ideas. For example, what I expected would happen is if he just doubled his rooks, that I would take, and it would be similar to the other line, but I just thought this is, so I just saw this, and I got fixated with this idea, and I kind of forgot about the other one. I'm totally winning here with this passed pawn. Him threatening mate myself. He's got this pawn's weak. This pawn's weak. It's totally winning. But which explains why he went knight b8, which again surprised me. And I played bishop b3. I think bishop b5 is much better. Because remember, my original plan, if he was going to go knight c6, was to try to do this capture anyway. Well, after he plays knight b8, if I go here, well, it's clear that his knight's going to come out to here, and I just get the same idea I had earlier. But for some reason, I lost that thread and played bishop to b3, and he captured rook. Now I have control of the rook file. So I went here, and I still didn't remember this idea of making this pretty simple capture that I want. So I played queen c4, thinking more pressure here. I wasn't really worried about this move because I can just take. And yeah, so I'm not worried about that. But he played a nice move I didn't expect, which is e5, and I decided that I would trade queens because I thought that with the queens off the board, this was going to be a lot simpler. I don't think I'm going to mate anymore, and I thought that after we did something like this, he's more or less forced to trade queens, and I thought this would be a pretty simple and straightforward win. I thought that leaving the minors was going to make it easier than just having the rooks and queens. So knight c6, and now I kind of remembered my original plan of just creating the second weakness here. My king is going to come pretty fast, and or he's going to have to move and let me in, or he can get the pin. He can step into a pin. I scared him a little bit here. He doesn't have to. He always has this move. He can also drop back. I mean, he panicked maybe and went here, so lets me win a second pawn. And then after I defend this, I'm attacking this guy. I have an extra pawn on both sides of the board, and he resigned here. Anyway, hope this was an interesting game and show you kind of what sort of can happen with some of these lines after this bishop g5 move and end up with this isolated d5 pawn.